After 15 months of the ongoing war in Ukraine, Bakhmut, the embattled Eastern Ukrainian city, has fallen. The claim was made by Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is the head of Russia's private militia called the Wagner Group. But now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky seems to have confirmed this news as well. During his bilaterals with the US President Joe Biden in Hiroshima, Zelensky clearly said that there's nothing left in Bakhmut. The takeover marks the end of the longest chapter in the 15-month war. The question is, what does the capture of Bakhmut mean for the ongoing war in Ukraine? And will this be a turning point in the Ukraine war? To answer all of this, we're now being joined by Dr. Lada Roslisky, founder at the Black Trident Defense and Security Consulting Group. And she's joining us live from Kiev. Thank you so much for joining us in WION, Doctor.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. Lada, this is a major breakthrough for the Russian troops in the ongoing battle in Ukraine. Help us understand as to how do you assess the capture of Bakhmut by the Russians, and do you think that this will act as a turning point in the ongoing war?
I think that it is a very sad day for people and morale in Ukraine because the city is now under the control of the terrorists and the Russian state together. The ongoing battle is exactly what it is. It's ongoing, and we are expecting any day the counteroffensive to start. So the fact that Bakhmut has been taken at this time does not really indicate that it will be held by the Russians. We see in previous areas where Russia had control over territories that they have actually moved away from it. That having been said, it's extremely painful to see another example of Russia's scorched earth policy. They just destroy everything and have the audacity to publicly say that they are liberating Ukrainians from Nazis. It's insane what they're doing, and more so, it's insane that the international community is letting this genocidal war continue in Ukraine at the pace that it is continuing at.
Yes, Dr. Lada, you speak about Russia's earth-scorched tactics. Also talk to us about the ammunition, or maybe the illegal ammunition that the Russian troops are using to capture Bakhmut and the other cities in Ukraine.
Yes, there have been reports of chemical weapons being used. Most recently, and publicly available information attests to the use of thermobaric weaponry and the phosphorus bombs, which basically are a carpet of fire that burns everything. The international community has done nothing when this was happening in Syria, by the same individuals, actually. So the Wagner group supported by the Kremlin policy. So the longer the Moscow remains unaccountable for these gross violations, the more risk we have of having this war really fester on a global level.
Right, Dr. Lada, now you're talking about international reactions. The G7 summit has just been wrapped up, where Zelensky was also attending the summit in person, and he clearly said that there's nothing left in Bakhmut. But later on, he clarified and said that Ukraine is still fighting for control of Bakhmut. What do you make of these contrasting statements, and what is the situation on ground zero at the moment?
Well, the situation on ground zero is available truly only to the people who are on ground zero. And I think that this mismanagement of messaging coming from the office of the president attests to that. It is an ongoing battle. The counteroffensive has not begun, so it is not time for the Russians to celebrate. However, the coordination of messaging definitely needs to be tightened up a little bit and made in such a manner that the international community truly understand what Russian liberation means, and that means complete and utter destruction. As President Zelensky said today, that is not really a victory for Russia because there's nothing there, and that Bakhmut lives in our hearts. Bakhmut used to have 150,000 people living in it, in the city itself and in the surrounding areas. Many of those people have been abducted and put into filtration camps by the Russians. Many of them are missing. Many of them are dead, casualties. A few of the lucky ones are internally displaced individuals inside of Ukraine itself, or possibly refugees in the European Union. So the devastation is massive. The human element is extremely saddening, and
Right.
Bakhmut doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately.
Right, Dr. Lara, you speak of Kiev's counteroffensive. Help us understand how, with Bakhmut being captured by the Russian troops, how will that affect Kiev's counteroffensive and strategy going forward in the ongoing war in Ukraine? Also keeping in mind that US has also now agreed and rather announced at the G7 summit a new tranche of weapons for Kiev.
Right. Well, Ukraine and definitely needs more weapons. The fact that the international community has been taking such a long time to agree on certain elements of closing Ukraine's skies is very frustrating. So we hear that talk of the F-16s potentially coming out, the training of the pilots that is being offered by many countries are all very positive signs. But every single day, Ukrainians are being killed on the ground. As for the counteroffensive, it's important to keep in mind that Ukraine has about 1,090 kilometers to the north with its border in Belarus, approximately 750, 800 kilometers north-south alongside the Russian border, and another 1,000 kilometers plus minus on the Black Sea region. So we have a very long border where the offensive is taking place. The Bakhmut is just one town of many towns that are in villages that are seeing destruction and Russian invasion.
Right, Dr. Lara, you've clearly highlighted why Bakhmut is such a contentious region and why both the troops are fighting there for 15 long months. Now, also help us understand that Bakhmut also highlighted an extraordinary rift among the Russian forces, that is between the Wagner chief Prigozhin and the Kremlin. Talk to us more on that.
It's extremely important not to fall into the trap of believing that the Wagner Group is in any way a private military corporation acting independently of direct orders coming from the Kremlin. Any type of ideas that Wagner Group operates on its own are incorrect. And we see that the Wagner Group is really trying to do its best to get more men into their ranks, and not only from Russia and Russian prisons and hospitals, but from countries far away from Russia itself. So that recruitment is extremely dangerous, but it is also indicative of the potentially dire situation that the Russian Federation itself is finding its position with its own armed forces and the mobilization. If mobilization were publicly made inside of the Russian Federation, we would certainly see at least an element of protest arriving inside of Russia. Russia has put itself in an extremely vulnerable position by starting this war in Ukraine, and it threatens to actually fall apart if it's not going to be doing their internal communications properly. Mobilization is a key factor of that. So the Wagner Group is mobilizing, recruiting on behalf of the Russian Federation. So it's very dangerous to believe that Prigozhin is doing anything without the direct orders of the Kremlin.
Right, Dr. Lara, you speak of how Prigozhin is dependent on what the Kremlin says. Then why did he come out a few weeks ago? He came out against the Kremlin, saying that the Kremlin wasn't providing enough support, enough ammunition or troops to the Wagner Group. Why did he come out with that statement?
Well, because the Russians are actually potentially facing shortage in artillery and the weapons that are needed. The Russians also have a very low respect for the men on the ground. They are really being used as cannon fodder, and that is a fact. When Prigozhin criticizes the Kremlin for not bringing the artillery fast enough, is just a little bit of an alarm bell that people should be paying attention to how much Ukraine actually has, because Ukraine has much less, and we have less men, less manpower, and we need to have much more than the Russians do.
Right, Dr. Lara, we'll of course have to wait and watch regarding Kiev's counteroffensive and how things turn around after Bakhmut being fallen under the Russian hands. But thank you so much for joining us in WION and sharing your insights with us on this. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.